Empires don't just fade away because of bad weather or a weak economy. They crash and burn because someone at the very top makes a spectacularly bad decision. We like to think of history's greatest rulers as geniuses, but the truth is, the biggest superpowers to ever exist were all taken down by pure and unadulterated human stupidity. Take the Third Reich. It was supposed to be a 1,000-year empire, a global superpower built on absolute control. Instead, it lasted just 12 years. But in that short window, it dragged the entire planet into the most devastating conflict human history has ever seen. It all started out of absolute desperation. After World War I, Germany was completely humiliated, buried under massive debt, and forced to take total blame for a war that ruined millions of lives. When a nation is that broken and miserable, people will follow literally anyone who promises to fix it and make them feel proud again. By 1929, the Great Depression wiped out whatever was left of their economy. Millions were out of work, and banks closed down overnight. Out of that absolute chaos, a failed artist and angry soldier stepped up. He understood something deeply terrifying about human psychology. When people are hurting, they don't actually want the truth. They just want someone to blame. He took total control of the government in early 1933, and within just a few weeks, the Parliament building went up in flames. He used that single event as an excuse to completely wipe out personal freedom, rule like a dictator, and lock up anyone who disagreed with him. By the summer, every single opposing political party was completely gone. Most regular people didn't even fight back because he gave them exactly what they hadn't seen in years: jobs, new roads, and a sense of pride. But the whole economic miracle was a massive illusion. It was funded by hidden debt and built for one ultimate purpose: total war. By 1938, he started taking over neighboring countries without firing a single shot. And by 1941, his forces controlled almost all of Europe. But this wasn't just about gaining territory. It was driven by an obsession with total destruction. Millions of innocent lives, families, children, and anyone deemed different or unaligned with the state were systematically wiped out. The state turned loss of life into an industrialized factory system, using trains that should have been supplying their own troops to transport innocent people to specialized camps instead. And that brings us to the single stupid mistake that broke the entire empire. In the winter of 1942, at the Battle of Stalingrad, his entire army got completely surrounded. Any rational leader would have ordered a tactical retreat to save hundreds of thousands of experienced soldiers. But because of pure arrogance and refusal to ever admit a mistake, he forbade them from moving back even an inch. Out of 300,000 men, only 6,000 ever made it home. That single ego trip completely destroyed his military backbone. By 1944, enemies were closing in from both the east and the west, turning their cities into absolute rubble. Even as the end was completely obvious, he refused to stop. Sending teenagers into the fight and ordering his own country's infrastructure, bridges, and factories blown to pieces so the incoming forces couldn't use them. In the spring of 1945, with enemy troops literally 2 blocks away from his underground bunker, he took his own life. A week later, it was completely over. An empire built on hate and total control collapsed in just 12 years, for months, and 8 days, leaving a completely ruined continent behind. When a society decides to trade its basic human conscience for raw power, a total collapse isn't just a possibility. It is an absolute guarantee. Now look at the Inca Empire. These people built an absolute masterpiece of a civilization high. Up in the Andes Mountains, where the air is incredibly thin and the terrain is brutally rough, they did all of this without using wheels, without iron tools, and without even a written language. By the early 1500s, they ruled over 12 million people, stretching across thousands of miles of mountains, deserts, and deep jungle. They connected this massive territory with 25,000 miles of roads that they literally carved into the rocky mountainsides with their bare hands. They were masters of organization. They didn't just conquer neighboring tribes, they brought the local leaders to their capital, educated them, married them into the royal family, and sent them back to run things smoothly. They kept track of every single piece of data using complex knotted strings, and they fed millions using genius farming terraces built right into the cliffs. Their stonework was so incredibly perfect that even 500 years later, you can't even slide a small knife blade between the blocks. But this entire massive, brilliant superpower cracked wide open because of one incredibly messy family drama. When the emperor died suddenly from a foreign disease that had spread ahead of European explorers, he didn't leave a clear plan for who should take over. This instantly sparked a brutal, bloody civil war between his two sons, Huascar and Otto, who tore the country apart, fighting for the throne. By the time Atahualpa finally won, the empire was completely exhausted and bleeding out. That is exactly when a Spanish explorer walked in with just 168 men, 1 cannon, and 27 horses. It sounds completely insane that such a tiny group could challenge an empire of 12 million people, but the Inca were totally divided and worn down. The explorer invited the new emperor to a peaceful meeting. The emperor completely underestimated the threat, made the stupid mistake of showing up with a small, totally unarmed group of attendants. The Spanish ambushed them immediately, killing thousands of people in a matter of minutes and taking the emperor hostage. The captive king offered to fill an entire room with pure gold and 2 more rooms with silver, just to buy his freedom. The Inca people delivered the massive treasure, but the explorers took the gold and executed him anyway. Within a few decades, the final strongholds fell, and the last ruler was publicly executed. A civilization that had thrived for centuries without the tools the rest of the world relied on was completely destroyed in just 40 years. All because a bitter family feud left the front door wide open for outsiders who cared about nothing. But the Roman Empire didn't actually vanish when Rome fell. The western half collapsed, but the eastern half didn't just survive, it completely thrived for another 1,000 years. This was the Byzantine Empire. They called themselves Romans, and they were completely right. Their capital, Constantinople, became the absolute richest and most heavily fortified city on the planet, while Western Europe went through centuries of complete chaos. The Byzantines kept civilization alive behind massive walls that no enemy army could breach for 800 years. At its absolute peak, 20 million people lived under their rule. They built massive cathedrals with domes so high they made people weep. And they created a legal system so thorough it still influences modern courtrooms today. But when a superpower survives everything thrown at it for centuries, it starts to believe it is completely invincible. Plagues eventually hit, wiping out millions of taxpayers, and rival armies swept in from the south, taking away their wealthiest territories in a single generation. The Byzantines were incredibly resilient, though they adapted, invented a terrifying secret weapon called Greek fire that could burn right on top of water, and kept fighting. But their single biggest, most mind-boggling mistake wasn't a battlefield blunder, it was a total failure of basic diplomatic awareness that turned their own allies against them. During the Fourth Crusade, the Byzantines got entangled in messy political infighting and made financial promises to Western European crusaders that they simply couldn't keep. When the Byzantines failed to pay up, the Crusaders, who were supposedly on the exact same side, completely turned on them. They brutally attacked and looted Constantinople, smashing the city to pieces and stealing centuries of accumulated treasure. The empire never truly recovered from that self-inflicted betrayal. What was left was a broke, fragile state surrounded by rising powers. By the time a new rival laid siege to the capital, a city that once held 500,000 people was practically a ghost town. The final emperor died fighting at the gates, and an empire that carried the legacy of ancient Rome for over a millennium ended on the exact same ground where it started, simply because they mismanaged their relationships and invited their own destruction inside the house. The Ottoman Empire lasted over 600 years, conquering Constantinople with a bold movie-like move, dragging 70 warships overland across a mountain to bypass harbor defenses. At its peak, it was a terrifying global superpower. But by the 1800s, corruption, debt, and a refusal to modernize left it crumbling. Then came the ultimate stupid mistake. Instead of fixing things internally, leadership made a disastrous gamble to join World War I on the losing side. The empire was carved up, and the last sultan quietly fled on a foreign warship, proving they couldn't survive a world that had moved on without them.